grief is much more like waves. There are these massive waves very close together. And with time, they grow further apart. And sometimes you get beautiful, calm seas. And sometimes, after weeks, months, years, decades even, your back is turned and a massive rogue wave comes at you and just takes you down. That's grief.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to today's episode. Today, you will be listening to Rabbi Steve Leder, who is the senior rabbi of Wilshire Boulevard Temple in Los Angeles. And he is the author of several books, and his most recent book being The Beauty of What Remains, How Our Greatest Fear Becomes Our Greatest Gift. And that's the book we will be talking about today. If you Google his name, you will be able to find lots of videos online. He's been on the Today Show with Hoda and Jenna. He's a regular there. He's also been in Fox News, Maria Shriver's Sunday paper. So he is definitely somebody that people look for inspiration as well as for motivation and for knowledge. And you will get a lot of that today by listening in and hearing about his own experience witnessing people going through grief as a rabbi in his 30 plus years of experience. And then now him living grief firsthand after the death of his dad. So please sit back and listen. And I would actually suggest you have pen and paper for this because he gives amazing tips and knowledge of not only how we can address our own mortality and prepare for our own death, really, but also just the way in how death can really help us evaluate and value how we live our lives. Thank you again, and be ready for this beautiful conversation. Welcome to today's episode. Today, I have the honor of having Rabbi Steve Leder. I was just telling Rabbi, I told you I was going to mess up. I'm going to say, when I see the word Leder, my Spanish language kicks in, and I want to say Leder instead of leader. And so I said, it's going to come up. And here it is. And just in the intro, I had already happened. But that is life, right? We roll with the punches.
It sounds good however you say it. Don't you worry.
Well, thank you. Well, we'll pretend as if it's I'm interviewing in Colombia. Then I could pass with the Leder instead of leader.
Very good.
Rabbi Leder, I'm so grateful that you're here and so honored to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I'm grateful that you're here. So we are here specifically to talk about your new book, The Beauty of What Remains, How Our Greatest Fear Becomes Our Greatest Gift. Just with the title itself, I was already like, oh my gosh, this is right up my alley. With the name of my podcast being Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between, I was like, okay, he thinks exactly like me about what grief is. So I am so honored for you to be able to share with our listeners about you.
Thank you, Kendra. I'm a fan of yours, and I'm honored to be on the podcast with you. I really am.
I'm grateful. So tell us a little bit about the journey. What led you to write this book? Because you've written other books before.
Yeah.
So what was the story behind writing this one? and it just launched January 5th. So it's very fresh off the press, people, fresh off the press. So tell us what led you to write this book.
I wrote this book. I think the best way to frame it is I wrote it as a kind of apology. Let me explain. I was a rabbi for 30 years, and before I wrote this book, at least started writing it. And during those 30 years, those 3 decades, I had literally helped more than 1,000 families walk through the journey that we call death and loss and grief and mourning. And I thought I was doing a pretty good job, Kendra. You know, I would have given myself an A- for sure. And then my father died after a 10-year journey through Alzheimer's disease. And my dad died. And that experience indicated to me, as I put it in the prologue of the book, everything I had been teaching and saying about death, loss, grief, mourning before my father died was just 1 degree shy of the deepest truth. And I wanted to write this book. I wrote this book to hopefully bring every reader down that 1 extra degree to the deepest truths of what death comes to teach us about life. Because my own personal experience, the book really explores the tension between Steve Leder, the rabbi, having to learn to become Steve Leder, the son. And I learned so much about loss in that movement from Steve Leder, the rabbi, to Steve Leder, the son. That was that extra 1 degree of truth. And so it caused me to reassess, relearn really what it's all about. And I'm happy to go through with you some of the things that I changed my view on in my teaching and feelings about, if you want to go there. So.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I want to go into each one of those. But what you said right there about Steve Leder, the rabbi, to then the son, even just in the book, like you start off as sharing your story of why you became a rabbi, but you start off by getting to know you as the child. Steve, I feel like I got to know Steve Leder, the child, Steve Leder, the one of how it is that you even got into becoming a rabbi. Then you see the journey of you sharing all these different beautiful stories and so heartfelt and so heartwarming of being at the bedside of all these different families. And like you said, like you could feel like, oh, you're an expert. Like you've seen death firsthand. Like, oh my gosh, you've sat through 1,000 deaths, of people in having to deal with families. And then you can see, I'm getting chills, I'm here in the process, but goosebumps. Then you see, like you just said, that 1 degree that you mentioned, you can see that in the book because you see that beautiful transformation into going into your own journey and your own experience and your very, very vulnerable and beautiful sharing. And I don't want to say too much about the book to the readers because I want to make sure you read it, but of that transformation of you as then sharing your perspective as the grieving son. And I can just say you did that beautifully in the book for sure. So yes.
You have no idea how gratifying it is to hear that, because the challenge of this book was to create a parallel narrative. Part of the book is a field guide to loss, death, grief, mourning, to help people who find themselves in it. And we all who have experienced know what the fog of death is and how lost you are. And so I wrote the book to be a kind of light in that darkness at the same time, for it also to be informed by my own exploration of that journey from rabbi to son. And sometimes, particularly in chapter 4, where I talk about an assisted suicide.
That one was, that one was very, because there you wore both
That's
hats.
right.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
there
yeah.
I hopefully fully explore, not resolve, but explore the tension between Rabbi Steve Leder and Steve Leder, the human being,
Oh, and it was
the man.
beautifully done. It was just
So we can
beautifully
get into
done.
that too. But the reassessments I made, that extra 1 degree really fell into, 4 or 5 really important areas. And that's kind of how the book is structured. Um, so shall we get into that? You tell me.
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay.
And by the way, this is something that we can jump all over the place. And I think that that was another thing too that I realized with your book. It's not in a linear mode. It's not a linear book in terms of that,
Correct.
you kind of jump into, the different timelines. But as we know firsthand, since we've experienced it, grief is not linear, so therefore
Right.
this
Right.
conversation
That's
is
right.
not going to be linear either, just so
Okay,
you
good,
know.
good, good. So, yeah, and I did kind of try to structure the book in waves, which is what I think grief is about. So that
It
you
was
just
perfect. Yeah.
mentioned, Kendra, you actually brought up the first thing I learned from my father's death, which is, as I put it in the book, anyone who thinks the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line doesn't understand grief, because grief is nonlinear. And I don't know how old you are. I'm 60.
I'm
And
45. I'm
my
45.
okay,
Yeah.
well then that's perfect because we have 2 generations here. So my
Yes.
generation and yours, I believe, were done a terrible disservice by this idea brought into the world by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, did many, many amazing things, including getting people talking about the stages of death and stages of
Yeah.
grief.
And
However,
preparing for it, the people that were
yes,
dying, preparing for their own grief, for their own
yes.
death. Hmm.
However, I think I don't agree with the concept of stages of grief, because stages of grief implies first you feel A, then you feel B, then you feel C, then you feel D, and then you're
Yep.
done. And that's just
100%.
not
Agree.
true.
I I
It is
agree. I
not
agree.
linear. And it implies there's a wrong way to grieve, you know?
Yes.
And that's
And it
also
implies
false.
if you
There's no
miss,
wrong way to grieve.
right. Because if you miss a step, then you're like, wait a minute, but I'm not feeling that.
Yeah,
Is it is there
right.
something wrong with me that I'm not like cursing at God and mad at God for this
Precisely.
happening? Or like you're
Precisely.
awaiting, wait, when is that stage going to happen? Because it hasn't
That's
happened
right.
yet.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and this whole idea of stages to me is just nonsense.
Hmm.
I I think it's much more like waves. Grief is much more like waves. There are these massive waves very close together, and with time they grow further apart. And sometimes you get beautiful calm seas, and sometimes after weeks, months, years, decades even,
Hmm.
your back is turned and a massive rogue wave comes at you and just takes you down. That's grief.
Yes.
Now, let's extend that wave
Yeah.
metaphor a little
What
further,
do you
because
do with
what
it?
are our
What do
options,
you do?
right?
Yes, our
Okay, so
options. Yeah,
this
we
was a
know. And
big
living in California, and
yeah,
you're from California, you know the
yeah,
Pacific, you
yeah,
know the waves there.
right. And
Let's
so
go
that's
into that.
actually the perfect setup. The old Steve Leder, before my father died, whenever any kind of wave was coming at me, any kind of loss, any kind of challenge, my default setting was I am going to stand up. I'm going to face that wave coming at me bare chested, face first, and I'm going to stand here and take it because I am stronger than that wave.
Mm.
Now, when it comes to grief, we all know what happens when you adopt that posture. You end up turned upside down, thrashed, thrown against the rocks, gasping for air.
Mhm.
The other choice, when that wave is coming at you, is to lie down, let it wash over you, and float with it until you can stand up again.
Hmm.
And that's what I learned. That's that 1 degree difference that makes all the difference for me when it comes to how to journey through grief. You've got
Oh,
to float with it. So
it's
that's the
so
first thing.
beautiful. Beautiful. Hmm.
The next thing, which is maybe too obvious to even say, but I think it's so fundamentally true for all of us who suffer a terrible loss. The next thing I learned is, no matter how many times we say, I love you, no matter how many times we hug and hold and are hugged by and held by the people we love, it's never enough. It's
Mm.
never enough. And that was a really important realization for me, that I think only death really comes to teach us. Death is the great teacher. And
Mm.
the next thing I learned, and this is a subtle but I think really important and permission giving point to those of us who grieve, is I learned about the duality of memory. We give a false representation of memory in the wake of death when we say things like, may his memory be a blessing, or
Mm.
she'll live on in your memories. Well, yes, and, right? Because there's a duality to memory. Yes, memory is beautiful, and it really, really hurts.
Hurts. Mm-hmm.
It's both. In the book,
Mm-hmm.
I say it's like being caressed and spat on at the same
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah,
That's memory.
some people don't even like to dream with their loved ones because of how much it
Yeah,
can hurt. For others,
yeah.
dreaming with their loved ones, even that is like, oh, they were in my dreams. So some are like, please don't show up because
It's
I don't know what
both.
to deal with those emotions. Yeah, so it's a duality.
It's
You're right.
both. And learning to live with that duality is the gray that you
Mm-hmm.
talk about. That's it, right? So that's
Mm.
another thing I learned. Another thing I learned is authenticity. And by that I mean, we so often, when we are approaching the dying or the grieving, try to adopt a different persona than the one that's truly ours. So many
Mm.
so many people come to you when you're mourning with this, they walk in the door with this sad, long, phony face, a bad acting job and whispered hushes, and
He's like, who's
that
sleeping?
is
Wait, who's sleeping?
not,
Yeah, why are
yeah,
you
and
whispering?
it's
There's nobody
not
sleeping.
what people need. What people
Mhm.
need, what people want, is for us to be with them in death who we were with them in life, because
Mm.
that is what assures them the bottom hasn't fallen out of the world. So what you need to do is just show up and be authentic. If you're a hugger, hug. If you're a feeder, feed. If you're a joker, joke. If you're a listener, listen. If you're a hand holder, hold my hand. That's all. I
Mm.
just need you to be, as I face death, who you have been for me in life. That's
Mm.
comforting. That's hopeful.
That's
That's
beautiful.
real. Yeah. And people don't
So,
realize that. They think they're doing the right thing pretending, and they're not.
so, so this is more in this particular tip or learning is not only when you're at someone's bedside or like in the case of somebody that's about to die, be your
Hmm.
authentic self with them,
Hmm.
but it can also then play into how you are when somebody else is grieving as well. How you are on the side of
Absolutely.
someone that has just lost a loved one. Yeah, so it applies on
That's
in
right.
both
And
cases.
frankly,
Yeah.
and it's frankly more important because you're going to be with the survivor much longer than you're going to be with the person who is dying.
Mhm.
So it's even more important to be authentic. That's what people need. Okay, just be yourself. People call me often. I get calls that go something like this: Steve, my best friend from college was just diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He's
Mhm.
got 3 to 6 months. I'm flying back to New York to visit him. What do I say?
Mhm.
And my answer is always the same: don't worry about what to say. I just want to share 3 words with you. And then I want to share 2 words with you. The first 3 words: just show up. Okay? Just show up. And then be real. And the rest
Mm.
will unfold. It'll be fine.
Yes.
So that's the beauty of showing up. As I like to say sometimes, it changes nothing, but it means everything. It's really
It
true.
is. It is so true. It's not the what to say. Like even now, and I even now, I mean, I've experienced grief firsthand, and I still don't even know sometimes what to say. Right when somebody,
Oh, that's
when I'm
such a good
expressing,
point.
it's like you never know what do I say to
It's
somebody,
such a
right?
good point. After 33 plus years, more than half of my life, of standing on front doorsteps before walking into a home to
Mm-hmm.
meet with a family to prepare them for a funeral, or standing in the hallway of the hospital outside a room before I go in, even after 33 plus years, I have no idea what I'm going to say.
Mm-hmm.
I just know that if I show up
Love
and I'm
this.
authentic, something beautiful will emerge.
Yeah, it's so perfect because you're in alignment. I think that that's the key, being in alignment with who we are in the
Mhm.
face of all these different challenges allows us, and I'm going to use this word because you use it here in terms of vessel,
Mhm.
the body being a vessel, and therefore, even just ourselves in life, when we're that vessel, then things just flow. And as long as we're being authentic,
Mhm.
then it's kind of like a pure reed, like a
That's
flute.
right.
You see, I'm here. It's my
Yeah.
Spanglish. I'm gonna say flute. I was gonna say flauta in Spanish,
That's
like
okay.
a reed, right? So the music for it to kind of flow, it just has to be clean. So as long as we're just present, we show up, then we're real, then things will just
They'll
be
emerge.
clear. They'll emerge
That's
and
right.
be clear. That is
That's right.
just beautiful, beautiful. So now, as I want to talk a little bit about how did you then, in the process of the 10 years with your dad with
Mhm.
Alzheimer's, what were some of the tools you used for your own grieving process in assimilating to that grief that was to come? It's like, it's like
Yeah.
anticipatory grief, basically, that you're dealing with
Yeah.
in that kind of a situation.
Well, here's the truth about Alzheimer's and dementia and other brain diseases. The people who have them die twice.
Mhm.
My father died twice. Once when his brain turned him into a different person than my father, and then when his body died. And the disease, this might sound harsh, but I mean it to be comforting to people when I tell them, Kendra, the disease is in charge. The disease has its own rhythm and power, and it's going to carry you along, and it's going to prepare you, and it's going to wean you
Mm.
so that when the day comes, it will make its own kind of sense in a way it does not make sense today. Because the truth is, there comes a time when more is not better, and when enough really is enough. And I encourage people. I guess we can go back to this idea of floating with it
Mhm.
to make peace with the fact and recognize and embrace even that the disease and its power and rhythm is in charge. And that's a kind of giving over of control and power and authority that I think is the beginning of embracing the lessons that death is coming to teach. I, for example, I didn't have a real conversation with my father for the last 5 years of his life. So I got used to living without being able to really talk to him, without being able to get his advice, without calling him to tell him a joke. Right? You learn to
Mhm.
live without as people diminish. The other thing I learned, which I want to share with everyone during that pretty much last 5 years of the 10 years of his Alzheimer's disease, and particularly the last year and a half or two, was I learned a new language with my
Oh.
father, which is the language of touch.
Mm.
I learned how important touch is, the, uh, how important and beautiful it was for me to just sit with him in his room, in that nursing home, in his wheelchair, sit by his side, and just hold his hand.
Mm.
I hadn't held my father's hand since I was a small boy. And I
That's
would
so
sit for hours and just hold his hand. When I would scratch his head, it would make him smile. When I would rub his shoulders, it would make him sigh. We developed a new language, and it was very beautiful. And I'm very grateful for it.
oh,
And that
that's just
never would have emerged without him losing the ability, to speak.
Mm. Oh, that is just like so moving. And it's so true. It's
Mm.
like we have all these other and it's kind of even just now what COVID is kind of teaching us, even now with quarantine, right? All these different ways of to be able to keep connected with people,
Yes,
through
yes,
this time,
yes.
right? It's
Well,
like we've had
like
to find
death,
different languages.
like death, COVID is the challenge and lesson of essentialism.
Hmm.
What really matters? And of course, this is the other thing you would think a rabbi would know this, but we all lose our way.
Yeah, and we're still
The
human. You're human. You're a
Yeah,
human
yeah,
too.
yeah. And I'm busy
You're
and
a human,
got a
Rabbi
lot of
Leder. Yes.
responsibilities.
Yeah, I was actually gonna
The-
say, which hats do you wear more
Yeah,
often even? Like, you
yeah,
have so many hats, yeah.
yeah. I wear them all at the same time, which is difficult.
It's a juggling act, yeah.
Yeah. But I learned in a very deep way from the pandemic and before that, my father's death,
Mhm.
that it's who we have, not what we have, that matters.
Yes.
And the who we have is a very small handful of people that really matter.
Mhm.
None of us have more than a small handful. And just to drive the point home further, I think about this particularly in cemeteries, and I'll tell you why. I obviously spend a lot of time in cemeteries. I was there 4 times this week. And
Oh, wow.
one of the things that amazes me every time is the almost complete unanimity of inscriptions on headstones. They almost all say exactly the same thing. Because when you have to encapsulate or distill a person's life down to 15 characters and 4 lines each,
Mhm.
you are engaged in an exercise of real emotional essentialism.
Mhm.
So, what do these headstones say? Not your net worth, not your zip code, not your
Not the car
grandchild's
you drove.
GPA,
Yeah, not the
not the
car
car
you
you
drove.
drove, right?
Not if you lived in
Uh,
Beverly Hills 90210 zip code, not
exactly.
the zip
None
code.
of it. None of it.
Mhm.
What does it say? Loving wife, mother,
Mhm.
grandmother, friend. Loving husband, father, grandfather, friend. That's it.
Mhm. Mhm.
That is the essence and meaning of life itself. And and that's a lesson that the pandemic, I think, has and I'm not dismissing the pain and suffering for a moment. I wish it never arrived, but it has arrived. Now what? What do we make of these losses? Well, one of the things I hope we make of these losses is that, as I said, it is who, not what we have that matters, and the who is a very small circle.
Mhm. You touch upon so many right now when you were talking. It remind me a little bit even too of right now when you were talking about who we touch. You said something that made me cry in your book, and is that you were hoping
Mhm.
that at least you'd impact 3 people in your life. No,
Yes,
was it a
yes.
rabbi that told? Was it a friend? No,
Yeah,
it was
well, he
something.
wasn't actually. It's interesting. So
It was
the
somebody who's
story
not a
you're
rabbi.
hitting
Yeah.
on is
Is it
that's right.
okay for me
Well,
to be sharing
correct.
anecdotes to people? Am I saying is
Totally.
it like
Of course.
okay? I was like, I don't
No,
want
of
to
course.
like say a punchline of the
No,
book.
no, I want to talk with you about what moved you in the book. That's important.
Yeah, like that I was
So
crying a bit too in that
this is a
part. Yeah.
really interesting story. When I was graduating from rabbinical school is a 5-year program after you finish college. And then you go out and get your first job as a young rabbi. I was 27 years old when I started my first job. So I was a kid. And when I was graduating, I went to 3 or 4 of my professors whom I really respected the most. And I asked each of them, and some of them were rabbis, some of them were not. I asked each of them, what, in your opinion, constitutes a successful rabbi? Because obviously I wanted to be a successful rabbi. And I got different answers. The most thoughtful and important answer I got was from my Hebrew literature professor, who was not a rabbi, Dr. Ezra Spicehandler, who has since died. And Dr. Spicehandler said to me, a successful rabbi is a person who deeply affects at least 3 people in the course of his rabbinate.
Mm.
and that taught me so much about, as I put it in the book, based on a Yiddish expression my father taught all five of his children.
I love it. I think
Yeah,
is this the one that's funny? Yeah.
a
There
little
was
is a
one, there
lot.
was several funny. No, oh no, that was
Yeah.
different. There was one, a different one. I was one, there was another
Oh,
Yiddish
Osma
one,
Stuktas Gatus, right? That one. If you
something
push,
of the
it
butt.
goes.
No, something of a butt, something of a butt of
Oh,
a,
it's yeah, is besser of the Geschwür auf the hinten, right? Which means it's better than a boil on your ass,
yeah,
right?
that's what it is. That's what, and that one, by the way, even though I was laughing first, then I was crying because then
Right.
it became a reality. So I was like, oh my gosh,
That's right.
how does he have me crying on what, laughing on one page, on one paragraph, and then the next paragraph I'm crying. So I love it. Sorry.
Isn't
So go back to
is
your
yeah.
your the first
So
Yiddish. So you
anyway,
said life.
Ezra Spice
Mhm,
Handler said, basically what he was saying to me is a little is a lot,
mhm.
and if you can really change the lives of a small number of people, you're a success. And I've never forgotten that, because he wasn't teaching me to think small, he was teaching me to really care.
Mhm. And that just makes so much sense for anybody's life. Just the fact that if we impact one person's life, that's already a legacy there in itself. The fact that
Yes.
something has been left behind that impacted that person, that then it's going to have an influence in their character and how they lead their lives, that then that continues on. And that's where I wanted to also talk about. Well, I don't want to jump too far.
Yes.
Well, yeah, let's jump to that part and then we'll go back to this other part that I just thought about the aspect of the afterlife memory, the memory, that part.
Mm,
Another one in
mm,
tears there. So
mhm.
take us into, because you share your own letter that you wrote already to your children, but
Yeah.
can you give us, please share with the audience these tips about how we
Yeah.
can do this in life, not about like what's in our will necessarily of who got what, but this
Right.
afterlife memory, please.
So what you're referring to is something called an ethical will, which I talk about in the book.
Mhm.
And so most people by a certain age have some kind of estate plan. They have some kind of, you know, document that makes sure that their heirs inherit their material possessions, their money, in after they die, the things they're bequeathing to their loved ones. So Jews since the 11th century, beginning in Germany and Italy and France, have created a second complementary or parallel document called an ethical will. And an ethical will is a document that you write to your children, and it bequeaths your values. It bequeaths the things, the non material things
Mm.
that you want your loved ones to hold in their hearts and their minds and their lives when you are gone. And I've written mine to my children, and I put it in the book. It's the first time it's ever been published, first time my kids saw it. But I think it's extraordinarily important because the truth is, our children, our loved ones, if you don't have children, it can be your nieces and nephews, it can be your best friends. The people we leave behind, they're going to need our values much more than they're going to need our stuff.
Mm.
There's a chapter in the book called Nobody Wants Your Crap, and it's really
I
about
saw
this
that was a good one.
mistake, right?
Uh-huh.
There's this mistake we make,
Mhm.
spending our lives acquiring, 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 collecting and collecting and collecting. And what you discover when a loved one who's done that dies is nobody wants all that crap. You can't even give it away. So it's really the non material that matters most. And an ethical will is a way to bequeath the non material to the people we love. And,
That's
and
just
that's
beautiful.
that's so important.
Now,
So
with that,
important.
With that, like for example, with your dad, being that he was diagnosed, 10 years ago. Well, he passed away. Has it been 2 years already since his passing, or
It's
just
been about two and a half, 2.5.
2.5 years? So, had he, for example, been able to write an ethical will prior to him developing
No,
Alzheimer's? He hadn't.
no. And this
Yeah.
is such an important point you're making. Another thing death comes to teach us is the truth of that statement. You never know. You never know when something is the last time.
Mhm.
You know, no baby knows the last time it'll ever nurse from its
Mhm.
mother's breast. You know, brothers never know when it's happening, when the water is draining out of the last bath they're ever going to take together.
Mm.
And I didn't know my last conversation with my father was my last conversation with my father, that he would be able to speak one day and unable to speak the next. My father didn't know that his last conversation was his last conversation with his son. And so I think this ethical will is doubly important because you really never know.
Mhm.
You want to hear the
Uh,
last paragraph of mine? Should I read it?
uh. Oh, no. Okay, let me just grab my tissue, box of tissues. Go ahead.
Because it'll give
I
it'll
haven't.
give the listeners a sense.
Yes, please do.
So this is just the last paragraph of my ethical will to my kids, whose names are Aaron and Hannah. Be good, and the rest works out. See the world with people you love. Cherish time. It matters so much more than things. Mine with you and mommy has made my life worth living. I wish for you that kind of love now. I wish for you that kind of love when I am gone. Say Kaddish and light a candle for me when I am gone. Feel its warmth and know I love you still, Dad.
Mm, it's so beautiful. Now, how was it for them? Because they're grown. Are they teenagers or in their 20s?
Oh no,
They're
they're
how old
they're
are?
they're millennials,
Oh,
28
oh,
and 31.
oh, and they're really? I was looking at the
Yeah.
picture on your website. They look so young. I was like, I thought they were
Well,
like
that's an
in
old
their
picture.
teens. Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
okay, they look in their.
Does
How
anyone pay
was it
attention
for
to their
them?
websites anymore with Instagram? Who pays attention to their website? Like the website's so 90s, you know?
So dated. It's
Uh,
so dated.
yeah,
How was it
yeah.
for them
Um,
reading this part? How was it? And did you read
my
it to them
my
before it
son,
published?
uh, I did. My son didn't have much to say about it.
Mm.
He doesn't like thinking about his
Your
dad ever
mortality.
dying.
Your mortality. It's that
My
you. Oh my gosh, we have to go back into that topic in a
Okay.
second. Go ahead.
My daughter said, "Oh, Daddy, that's so sweet." So that's how she felt about it, and
Uh,
she's generally more expressive than our son. Uh,
uh,
but they were both, Let me put it this way: they did not give me the millennial eye roll that I get when I ask
mm.
them to help me with my phone. So that was good.
Maybe you can ask them, can you help me update the picture on my website where people think
Yeah,
we're teen?
yeah. Okay. I'll get on
I'm
that.
joking.
I'll
I'm
get on
joking.
that.
I'm joking. It's a beautiful family picture. It was just me. Like I was like, oh, they look so young.
Yeah. No,
I
they're all
wanted
grown up.
no, plus it's so hard to take. I think any pictures I have of my children, my kids are 13 and 12. I
Mhm.
probably have not posted many pictures. I maybe one a year that they let me kind of post. But when they were little, I'd
Yeah.
have one like, 5 pictures a day on there.
No, they
So
get very tough on you as they get older. They
yeah,
don't. My
they
kids
don't
are
want
my
to.
kids are like
Yeah,
censors.
you have to talk to their agent. It's like, no, talk to my agent
Exactly.
about
Exactly.
posting their pictures. I wanted to talk about that part when you said that he didn't say much. That aspect of the fact that it is so hard for us human beings to talk about our mortality. We talk about birth, we plan birth, we that aspect of people when yeah when they're expecting a baby, all the plans that they make and talking about the birth plan. but we don't talk about our death. There's such taboo around it. And that the fact of us talking about it, or even the fact of you writing already this, that you're leaving behind, that there's this fear component of that. What would you say to this topic, and how, yeah, what are your thoughts about this? The
Well, I think
normalizing the conversation. Let me put it that way.
I think we should start really early, and by that I mean I'm thinking of writing an article on children and death, and I'm going to call it "Don't Flush the Fish." And what I
Yes.
mean by that is
Yes.
we have
Oh,
all these opportunities, right? We have all these opportunities to start exposing children to grief and to
hmm
death and to loss that we deny them.
yes. And
So
we
when the
deny
goldfish
ourselves, not only
dies,
them, but ourselves of
well,
that
that's right.
opportunity of teaching
That's
them.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. Now, when the goldfish dies, some parents flush the fish while the kid's at school. They run out and get a new one and put it in the bowl. And they pretend death didn't occur, right?
Yep.
What a
hmm
wasted opportunity. You
Agree.
need to take that little dead goldfish, you need to put it in a matchbox, you need to go out in the backyard, you need to dig a hole, you need to say some beautiful nice things about that fish, how pretty it was, how it always finished its food, whatever you want to say, and
hmm
let your kids talk, and then bury that goldfish and teach them how to face death, right? As opposed to keeping death at arm's distance. Now, we do this as a society. First of all, 80% of Americans say, I'm sorry, most Americans, most people say they want to die at home. 80% of Americans do not die at home. And what happens when we die? A van shows up and whisks us away. And then we go to a mortuary where, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, we put suits and ties and pretty dresses on the dead, and we put makeup on the dead, all to make them look less dead.
Alive.
Yeah,
hmm
yeah.
hmm
And we say things, really stupid things to children like, Grandpa's sleeping, Grandpa's
mm
resting, right?
Oh, and then that
Now,
makes people
first
like
of all, that's a
be afraid of sleeping. I'd be afraid
terrifying,
to fall asleep.
exactly. It's a terrifying thing for kids then to go to sleep, of course.
Yes. I'm
But
not
it's
going to wake
also
up
a
like grandpa
lie.
didn't wake up. Yeah.
It's a lie. We don't even use
hmm
the right words. Grandpa's body has died, you know? Yeah, his heart stopped, however you want to say it. So I think the answer to your question really ideally is to start very early and normalize this for people. And I also think that helping people with what we were saying earlier about showing up authentically. If you know that the job is just to show up authentically, it's a lot easier than if the job is to show up and pretend. So I think we also need to say more often and empower people more fully to just show up and be yourself, because that's
hmm
enough. In fact, that's a lot.
That's all. It's way more than it. That's a thing. A lot of times people don't show up because they really do not know what to even do. And so they stop even texting to check in on somebody or call them because they're like, I don't even know what I'd say. They're so
Right,
uncomfortable around it. Instead of
right.
honestly, like I say, this is what I say. I do not know what to say right now. And I don't think that there's anything I could say that could make you feel better. Just know that I'm here. I
I'm
like,
here.
I'm here.
I'm
I'm
here.
here. Whatever you
I'll tell you
need,
something,
I'm here.
how smart you are. The Navajo have a beautiful mourning custom where if someone in the village dies, they go to the mourner's home, they walk in, they sit down, they stay a while, and then they leave. They
Mhm.
say nothing. They're just physically there.
Presence,
Yeah,
presence, and
that's
that
enough.
energy. Yeah, that is enough because just that presence, you feel it. You know that it's the the words. Even just what that actually just made me think of you holding your dad's hand right
That's
there.
it.
There were no
That's it.
words. You were just
No,
there, and
no.
that was enough.
And there's nothing to say anyway. What is
Yes.
there to say, really?
hmm
This is not really a time for words, it's a time for presence.
Oh, so true. So beautiful. I could keep going and asking you all these other things, but I know you have
I
another
do.
interview.
I
Tell me, is there something that you want to leave to the listeners? I do want to ask you actually if you can share a little bit. One, how do people get your book? And again, the
uh-huh.
name is
Thank you.
The
Yeah.
Beauty of What Remains, How Our Greatest Fear Becomes Our Greatest Gift. I have put it also on my website, and I'll put it on the link of this podcast. And then other ways in which people can get it if you want to share that. And then I want you to talk about the other book, because the other book, the How Suffering Transforms Us, the one I
Yes.
want to
Yes.
also then get, that I think sounds like a perfect book for people to be reading also right now during this time.
Yes.
So
Thank you so much for that. It's generous of you. The book again is called The Beauty of What Remains: How Our Greatest Fear Becomes Our Greatest Gift. And you can obviously get it on Amazon, your local bookstore. It's always nice to shop locally. You can follow me best, I would say, on Instagram, and it's at Steve_Leder, Leder. So that's at Steve_Leder, because I'm pretty engaged in Instagram.
because
I
you're with
really do
millennials, because
engage there.
you have millennial kids. You're
Yeah,
so
and
not so
I think it's
90s
amazing.
anymore.
I know. I think Instagram is just amazing,
Yeah.
and it's such a great way to communicate with people. So you can get to the book through the link in my bio, and I'm pretty easy to find if you just Google, Steve Leder or Rabbi Steve Leder, however you want to do it. You'll find me. I don't hide. And now the other thing is the book before this book. I would say sort of the part A to this part B is a book called uh, More Beautiful Than Before: How Suffering Transforms Us. And it's a book about, essentially, we're running out of time, so I'm going to put it pretty simply. The thesis of that book is that we all, sooner or later, walk through hell. And there are many
Mm.
kinds of hell, Kendra. There's the
Yeah,
hell
yeah,
of
yeah.
death, there's the hell of grief, right? There's the hell of losing a kid, there's the hell of cancer, there's the hell of your marriage falling apart,
Mhm.
there's the hell of losing your money, there's the hell of losing your reputation. There are many forms of hell. And that book is really about the fact that we all go through hell, and the point is not to come out empty handed. Don't
Mm.
come out of hell empty handed.
Don't miss that. Don't miss that
Allow that
opportunity.
suffering.
Yes.
Dostoevsky said his greatest fear was that his life would not be worthy of his suffering.
Mm.
That's such a powerful idea. Can you lead a life worthy of the suffering you have endured? Because then, even though you're broken, somehow you will be more whole. You'll lead a
Yes.
more beautiful and meaningful life as a result of the pain. And that's really what that book is about.
Ah, beautiful. I'm running to get that one too. Now that I've
Good.
finished this one, it's amazing. Thank you so much. It's just been an honor to now actually get to speak to somebody. I really did feel like I knew you already reading this. And so I feel like I got to know your essence and your soul. You really did share that so beautifully here. And I just appreciate you so much for sharing now here with our listeners. So thank you so much, Rabbi Leder.
Thank you, Kendra. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you for the really important and beautiful work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.